The safe house was supposed to be secure. They'd moved Seraphine here after 48 hours in the medical clinic, when her wounds had healed enough for travel but not enough for combat. It was a farmhouse in the rural borderlands, the kind of place that existed in the map's margins, claimed by neither side because it had nothing worth fighting over. Darius stood at the window, watching the surrounding fields for signs of pursuit that instinct told him was coming. Behind him, Seraphine rested on a simple bed, her immortal resilience finally overcoming the damage Victor had dealt. The rest of their team had scattered, some to other safe houses, some to try salvaging what they could of the network, some simply disappearing into whatever life they could cobble together as hunted fugitives. They were alone. And in the quiet that followed catastrophe, they finally had to face what they'd been avoiding. 17 safe houses raided, Seraphine said, her voice still carrying a rasp from partially healed throat damage. 43 members of the network killed or captured. 600 refugees displaced when the safe houses fell, now on the run with nowhere to go. She recited the numbers mechanically like a damage report. And Victor still alive, his propaganda campaign succeeding, our reputation destroyed on both sides. We saved 23 people from that compound, Darius countered, not turning from the window. They're alive because we went in. Are they? Elena's last report said 12 of them were recaptured in the raids that followed. 3 killed resisting arrest. The others scattered, probably dead by now or wishing they were. The bitterness in her voice was cutting. We traded a functioning resistance network for maybe 8 lives. That's not victory. That's failure with good intentions. Darius finally turned to face her. She sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a blanket despite not feeling cold the way humans did, looking smaller somehow. Diminished. The fierce war bride who'd faced down her own court was gone, replaced by someone wrestling with consequences. What would you have had me do? He asked quietly. Let Victor kill you? Honor some ancient vampire law while you died? Yes. The word came out sharp, then she softened it with visible effort. Yes, Darius. Because my death would have meant something in vampire culture. Victor would have won the challenge cleanly, but the terms meant everyone else went free. The captives, our team, all of them. He'd have been bound by the traditional codes to let them go. You don't know that. He's already broken every code that matters. I know that better than you do. Her eyes flashed crimson, anger sparking through the exhaustion. I'm Vampire Darius. I understand our ways, our laws, our twisted sense of honor. Victor is brutal and ambitious, but he's not chaotic. He follows the old laws because they give him legitimacy with the zealots. If I'd fallen in a proper challenge, he'd have honored the terms. That's how it works. So I should have just watched you die. Yes. Because I'm one person and the network was hundreds. Because the work mattered more than me. She stood now, the blanket falling away, her body whole again but her spirit clearly fractured. You saved me at the cost of everything we built. Don't you understand? Your love, or whatever this is, broke the movement. Victor's propaganda works because it's true. Humans can't honor vampire laws. Humans will always choose personal sentiment over sacred codes. The words landed like physical blows. Darius felt something cold settle in his chest, beneath the anger and exhaustion. So that's what this is now. That's what we're doing? Blaming each other for trying to survive? I'm not blaming you for trying to survive. I'm blaming you for not understanding that some things are bigger than individuals. That there are times when the right choice is to let someone die so the mission succeeds. Her voice rose, centuries of command and warfare bleeding through. You're a soldier, Darius. Or you were. You know about acceptable losses. You know that sometimes you sacrifice the peace to win the game. But when it came down to it, when the choice was me or the mission, you chose me. And now hundreds are dead or scattered because of that choice. I chose you, Darius said, his voice dangerously quiet, because the mission was supposed to be about proving that people matter more than politics. That we could build something where human and vampire lives had equal value, where we didn't just tally up acceptable losses and move on. If the network only works when we're willing to sacrifice each other, then what's the point? How are we any different from the war machines we left behind? We're different because we had a chance to actually change things. Because for 2 years we were showing both sides that coexistence was possible. And now that's gone because you couldn't bear to lose me. She was fully standing now, pacing like a caged predator, energy returning as her anger built. Do you know what Victor's people are saying? That humans are emotionally unstable. That they can't make rational decisions in crisis. That any alliance with them will crumble the moment their feelings get involved. And they're pointing to you as Exhibit A. Good. Darius felt his own anger rising now, hot and human and unapologetic. Let them point. Let them say I chose love over law. Because I did and I'd do it again. You want to know the difference between me and the generals who sent thousands to die for strategic objectives? The difference is I refuse to treat people like game pieces. I refuse to accept that the only way to fight monsters is to become one. That's not fighting like a monster, that's making hard choices. No, that's what people tell themselves so they can sleep at night after sacrificing others. That's the logic that's kept this war going for 70 years. Both sides convinced that the other is disposable, that enough acceptable losses will eventually lead to victory. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. You're not an acceptable loss to me, Seraphine. You never will be. So if that makes me unfit for command, fine. If that makes me emotionally compromised, I'll own it. But I won't apologize for refusing to let you die. Then you're a fool. Her voice went cold, the warmth that had developed between them freezing over in an instant. A noble, well-intentioned fool who can't see past his own attachment to understand the bigger picture. And you're so wrapped up in tactical thinking that you've forgotten why we were doing this in the first place. Darius felt the argument spiraling, felt them both saying things that would leave scars, but couldn't stop himself. The whole point was that individuals matter. That each life saved was worth the effort. Now you're tallying casualties like a quartermaster counting supplies, and you sound exactly like the commanders we left behind. Seraphine recoiled as if struck. For a long moment she just stared at him, and in her ancient eyes he saw pain warring with fury. Get out, she said quietly. What? Get out. I don't want you here right now. Her voice was level, cold, absolutely certain. You've saved me twice now, once from Victor's blade, once from his killing strike. Both times it cost more than my life was worth. I won't let there be a third time. Seraphine, I didn't mean. You meant every word. So did I. And now we both need time to decide if this, she gestured between them, is sustainable, or if we're just two people with compatible traumas who confused mutual rebellion for something deeper. Darius felt the words like a knife between his ribs. You don't mean that. Don't I? Darius, we've known each other for 2 years. Most of that time was spent fighting beside each other, running operations, being too busy surviving to actually examine what we are. We had one conversation in a garden, one stolen kiss in a ruined cathedral, and we've been calling it a covenant. But what if it's not? What if it's just convenient fiction? Two people telling themselves they've found something profound so the exile and the hunted life feel meaningful. You said it was real. Back in Geneva you said. I said a lot of things. I was injured, grateful, caught up in the moment. She turned away, unable or unwilling to meet his eyes. Maybe I was wrong. The silence that followed was devastating. Darius stood frozen, feeling the foundation of the past 2 years crack beneath him. Every shared moment, every quiet conversation in safe houses, every time they'd fought back to back and trusted each other implicitly, all of it suddenly suspect, questioned, maybe imagined. Fine, he said finally, his voice empty. If that's what you want. If you need space to decide whether I'm worth the trouble, take it. He walked to the door, grabbed his pack and paused with his hand on the handle. Part of him waited for her to call him back, to say she didn't mean it, to break the terrible cold that had descended between them. She said nothing. He left. The town was 3 miles away, close enough to reach on foot, far enough to feel like a different world. Darius walked the distance in the fading afternoon light, his mind churning through the argument, replaying every word, wondering where the breaking point had actually been. She wasn't wrong. The network was in ruins. Hundreds of people were displaced or dead or captured because he'd broken the challenge rules. His choice, his love or whatever he wanted to call it, had cost them everything they'd built. But she wasn't right either. Because accepting her death, watching her die for the sake of vampire traditions and tactical calculations, would have broken something fundamental in him. Would have made him into the kind of person who could prioritize mission success over the person who mattered most. There was no good answer. Just different flavors of failure. He found a pub in the town, one of those ancient establishments that had survived everything from plague to war through sheer institutional inertia. He ordered whiskey, cheap and harsh, and sat in a corner booth watching the locals carefully not watch him back. He was obviously an outsider, obviously trouble, but this was neutral territory. People minded their business. He was 3 drinks in when the news feed started showing Victor's latest propaganda piece. The vampire lord had cleaned up well. His injuries from the underground team's barrage healed, his armor immaculate, his presentation carefully crafted for maximum impact. The terrorist known as the Underground has been dismantled, Victor announced to assembled press from both human and vampire outlets. Their ringleaders are scattered, their safe houses eliminated, their network of sedition broken. This is what happens when extremists attempt to undermine the legitimate structures of power. Both our peoples can rest easier knowing these anarchists have been stopped. The screen showed images then, safe houses on fire, bodies being carried out, and worst of all, some of the rescued refugees from previous operations being paraded as willing informants who'd been coerced into cooperation. It was masterful propaganda, turning every act of mercy into evidence of manipulation, every rescued civilian into a character witness against them. Darius watched it all with numb detachment. This was defeat, total and comprehensive. Not just of the network but of the idea behind it. Victor had won not by destroying them in battle, but by destroying their legitimacy, their narrative, their very reason for existing. And Seraphine blamed him for it. Maybe she was right too. He ordered another drink. Somewhere around the 6th one, a figure slid into the booth across from him. Human, male, maybe 50, wearing the kind of nondescript clothes that suggested someone who wanted to blend in. But his eyes were sharp, assessing, and he carried himself with military bearing. "Commander Thorne," the man said quietly. "Or do you prefer just Darius now?" Darius's hand moved instinctively toward the concealed weapon at his hip, but the man raised empty palms. "Easy. I'm not here to arrest you. In fact, I'm here to offer you something. Not interested. You don't know what it is yet. Don't care. Whatever it is, I'm done. The underground is finished. I'm finished. Find some other idealist to disappoint." The man smiled faintly. "I'm Colonel Marcus Reeves, Human Coalition Special Operations. And I'm not here to recruit you for official channels. I'm here to offer you something unofficial." Despite himself, Darius's interest peaked. "I'm listening." There are those of us in command who thought the Underground's approach had merit. Who saw value in the back-channel communications, the refugee evacuations, the attempts to maintain some humanity in this meat grinder of a war. Reeves leaned forward. "Victor's propaganda offensive has made it impossible to support you openly. But covertly? With deniable assets and black budget resources? We can rebuild." "Rebuild what?" Victor exposed everything. "Both sides are hunting anyone associated with the Underground. So we go deeper underground. Smaller cells, better security, harder to infiltrate. And we focus on what worked, getting civilians out of war zones, maintaining communication channels between moderates on both sides, documenting war crimes so that someday when this ends, there can be accountability." Reeves slid a data chip across the table. "Resources. Safe house locations we've never used. Contacts in both human and vampire territories who can help. Equipment. This could be the start of Underground 2.0. Darius looked at the chip like it might explode. "Why me? I'm the one who broke the network in the first place. You're also the one who went into that compound for 23 captives when the smart tactical choice was to abandon them. You're the one who violated vampire law to save your partner's life. You're the one who keeps trying to do right even when it costs everything." Reeves met his eyes. "That's not weakness, Commander. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need. People who won't sacrifice others just because the numbers work out. And if I say no? Then you drink yourself into oblivion in this pub," Victor continues unopposed, "and thousands more die in a war that both sides are too proud to end. Your choice." Reeves stood, leaving the data chip on the table, and departed without another word. Darius sat staring at the chip for a long time. It represented everything. A chance to rebuild, to matter again, to maybe salvage something from the wreckage. It also represented diving back into the work that had cost him everything, that had destroyed his relationship with Seraphine, that had left him sitting alone in a bar drinking away his guilt. He should refuse. Should take this as a sign that some battles couldn't be won, that he'd tried his best and failed, that it was time to find some quiet corner and fade away. But that wasn't who he was. Had never been who he was. Damn it. He pocketed the chip, paid his tab, and walked back out into the twilight. The path back to the safe house stretched before him, and he knew he needed to face Seraphine, needed to have the conversation they'd both been avoiding, needed to figure out if there was anything left to salvage between them. But when he arrived at the farmhouse, he found it empty. She'd left. Taken her gear, erased any signs she'd been there, disappeared into whatever network of contacts she still had access to. The only evidence she'd existed at all was a note, handwritten on the same expensive stationery she'd used in Geneva. Darius, you were right about one thing, individuals matter. I forgot that, got too focused on the tactical picture, started treating lives as numbers instead of people. That's not who I want to be. But you were wrong about something too. Love, real love, doesn't demand the other person sacrifice their principles. It doesn't require breaking sacred laws or compromising everything they believe in. What we had was real, but it was also incomplete. We built it on rebellion and desperation, and those are shaky foundations. I'm going back. Not to face Victor. That would just give him another propaganda victory. But to work with the moderate factions in the court who still believe coexistence is possible. Someone has to counter his narrative from the inside, and I'm positioned to do it. You should rebuild the network if you can. Do it smarter this time, harder to infiltrate with better security. But do it without me. We make each other weaker, Darius. We compromise each other's judgment. Apart, we might actually accomplish something. This isn't goodbye. It's just necessary distance. Maybe someday when the war finally ends and we're not running for our lives, we can sit down in that quiet place we talked about and see what remains. Until then, survive. And don't make any more dramatic rescues on my behalf. Darius read the note 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in his pack next to the data chip. 2 futures laid out before him. One building a new underground network, working covertly to save lives and maintain channels of communication. The other pursuing Seraphine, trying to repair what they'd broken, refusing to accept that distance was the answer. He couldn't do both. The work would consume him completely, and if he split his focus, he'd fail at everything. He thought about the argument. About her accusation that he'd valued her over the mission. About his counter that individuals had to matter more than tactics. He thought about Victor's propaganda still playing on news feeds, shaping the narrative of their failure. He thought about the hundreds of refugees displaced when the network fell, now hunted by both sides, desperately needing someone to rebuild the infrastructure that had saved them. He thought about Seraphine, alone in vampire courts, facing down hardliners and zealots, trying to be the moderate voice without any support network. And he made his choice. 6 months later, Commander Darius Thorne, now operating under a dozen different aliases, stood in a rebuilt safe house watching a refugee family board a transport that would take them out of the war zone. Husband, wife, 2 children, all human, all rescued from a compound 3 days ago. Thank you, the husband said, gripping Darius's hand with desperate gratitude. We'd be dead without. Don't thank me, Darius interrupted gently. Just get somewhere safe and stay there. Rebuild your lives. That's thanks enough. The family departed, and Colonel Reeves approached from the operations room. That's 273 since we restarted operations. Not bad for 6 months. Not enough either. Never is. But it's progress. Reeves handed him a data pad. New intelligence. Victor's expanded his operations into the Eastern Territories. He's consolidating power, bringing more houses under his banner. The hardliners are rallying to him. Any word from the moderate factions? Some. There are rumors of a coalition forming, vampires who want to resurrect the Concordat. But they're being careful, staying in the shadows. Too much exposure and Victor crushes them. Darius nodded absently, his attention on the intelligence report. Somewhere in those dry tactical summaries and political analyses, Seraphine was working, fighting her own battle in the corridors of vampire power. The second summit came 30 months after the first. It was held in a different city, Moscow this time, neutral ground maintained by the Eastern Coalition who'd managed to avoid getting drawn fully into the human-vampire war. The circumstances were different too. Last time there'd been hope, however fragile. This time there was only desperation. The war had escalated beyond anyone's worst projections. Victor's confederation of zealot houses controlled nearly a third of the vampire territories and had pushed deep into human-held lands. The human coalition had responded with increasingly brutal tactics, deploying weapons that walked the line of genocide. Civilian casualties on both sides had reached numbers that made earlier atrocities look like footnotes. And through it all, two resistance movements worked in the shadows. Darius's rebuilt underground network, now called the Covenant, in deliberate reference to what they were fighting for, and Seraphine's coalition of moderate vampire houses, known as the Restoration, because they sought to restore the laws and protocols that had once limited the war's brutality. They hadn't communicated directly in over 2 years. But their operations intersected often enough that Darius knew she was alive, knew she was still fighting her own battle. Sometimes he'd arrive at a compound to find captives already freed by someone who'd gotten there first, left with the kind of surgical precision that marked vampire intervention. Sometimes she'd walk into court sessions to find intelligence on Victor's war crimes waiting anonymously, documented with the thoroughness that marked human military analysis. They were still partners in a way. Just partners who couldn't afford to stand together. Until the summit changed everything. Darius arrived as part of the unofficial delegation. The Covenant had enough recognition now that they rated observer status, though the official human government still denied any connection. He wore civilian clothes that marked him as neither military nor diplomatic, occupying the ambiguous space he'd learned to navigate. He saw her across the assembly hall on the first day. She was part of the official restoration delegation representing the moderate vampire houses, and she looked different. Still beautiful in that supernatural way, still carrying herself with centuries of accumulated grace. But harder too. More political. The war bride who'd stood beside him at Crimson Vale had been replaced by someone who'd spent 30 months navigating vampire court politics and surviving multiple assassination attempts. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. She gave the tiniest nod, acknowledgement, nothing more, and returned her attention to the proceedings. Professional. Distant. Exactly what they needed to be. The summit was brutal from the start. Victor's confederation had sent a delegation too, demanding recognition as a legitimate vampire government, calling for the moderate houses to be declared traitors. The human coalition was split between hardliners who wanted total war and pragmatists who recognized that the current trajectory led to mutual extinction. Darius participated in the side negotiations, the back-channel conversations where the real work happened. He met with vampire moderates, human peace advocates, representatives from the neutral nations trying to limit the war's spread. Progress was measured in inches, every small agreement feeling like moving mountains. On the summit's third evening, he was leaving one such meeting when he found Seraphine waiting in the corridor outside. Alone, without guards or observers, in clear violation of protocol. "Walk with me," she said quietly. They walked through the secured building's gardens, a carefully maintained space that felt surreal in its peace. For several minutes, neither spoke, just two people walking side by side, not quite close enough to touch. "You've done good work," Seraphine said finally. "The Covenant. 273 refugees in the first 6 months. Now it's up to what, thousands?" 3,400 confirmed extractions, Darius replied. "Probably more that we don't have documentation for. Your restoration has done pretty well too. Convinced 8 houses to refuse Victor's civilian targeting, maintain the Concordat protocols in areas under your influence. 9 houses now. House Meridian joined us last month." She paused by a fountain looking at the water. "We're losing Darius. Both of us. Victor's gaining ground faster than we can counter him. The human hardliners are deploying weapons that violate every treaty ever written. Our small acts of mercy are being drowned out by industrial-scale atrocity." "I know. Then why do we keep doing it?" He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in 30 months and saw the exhaustion there. The weight of fighting a battle that couldn't be won, staying true to principles that seemed increasingly quaint in the face of total war. "Because someone has to," he said simply. "Because if everyone gives up on trying to be better, then Victor's already won. The question isn't whether we're winning, we're not. The question is whether we can hold the line long enough for circumstances to change. That's not a strategy. That's hope. Sometimes that's all you have." Seraphine laughed, bitter and tired. "I used to mock humans for that. For holding on to hope when the rational calculation said all was lost. Now I understand it. Hope isn't about probability. It's about refusal. Refusing to accept that the worst outcome is inevitable. They stood in silence again, and Darius felt the distance between them like a physical thing. 2 feet of space that might as well have been continents. They'd been closer back in Geneva, back when they didn't know what the cost would be. "I read your note," he said finally. "The one you left at the farmhouse. You said we made each other weaker." "We did. We do." But her voice was uncertain now. "I don't agree. I think we make each other more human. More willing to risk everything for something that matters. And yes, that's dangerous. Yes, it compromises tactical judgment. But it also keeps us from becoming the monsters we're fighting." Darius. They hadn't communicated since she left. Hadn't risked the contact, hadn't trusted that their messages wouldn't be intercepted and used against them both. But sometimes in the intelligence reports he saw evidence of her influence. A house that suddenly refused to participate in civilian targeting, a noble who called for renewed negotiations, a vote in the Eternal Court that went unexpectedly toward moderation. She was keeping her promise. Fighting from the inside while he fought from the outside. It wasn't what he wanted. He wanted those quiet conversations, wanted to build something together, wanted the covenant they'd made in a broken cathedral to mean what he'd hoped it meant. But maybe she was right. Maybe they made each other weaker. Maybe distance was the only way they could both be effective. He'd chosen the work. Chosen to rebuild and save who he could and be the voice arguing that individuals mattered. She'd chosen to work within the system, to be the moderate voice in a court full of extremists. Different battles in the same war. "Sir?" Reeves prompted. "You all right?" "Yeah." Darius set down the data pad and pulled on his jacket. "Next mission briefing in an hour?" "Affirmative. We've got a lead on another holding compound in the border region. Then let's get to work." He walked toward the operations room, carrying the weight of choices made and opportunities lost, still trying to do the right thing even when the right thing cost everything. Behind him, pinned to the wall of his private quarters where no one else would see it, was a note on expensive stationery and a data chip containing 7 years of wartime testimony. Promises given and received, evidence of trust shared between 2 people who tried to build something impossible. He hadn't given up on that covenant. He just postponed it until the war ended or they both died trying to end it, whichever came first. Some promises took longer to keep than others. "I'm not asking you to come back. I understand why we had to separate, why the work needed us in different places. But don't tell me it made us weaker. Caring about each other, having something to fight for beyond abstract principles. That's strength, not weakness." Seraphine turned to face him fully, and in her crimson eyes, he saw the same struggle he felt. "If we do this, if we acknowledge that what's between us still matters, it's going to compromise us again. Next time you're in danger, I'll want to save you. Next time I need help, you'll want to provide it. And those decisions will cost other people. Maybe. Or maybe they'll inspire others to make the same choice. To prioritize people over tactics. To remember what we're actually fighting for." He took a step closer, closing some of that terrible distance. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm not asking you to choose between me and the restoration. I'm just asking if there's still something here worth naming." She reached up, placing one cold hand against his cheek in an echo of a gesture from years ago. "There was always something here worth naming. I was just afraid that naming it would make it hurt more when I inevitably lost it. And now I think the hurt is worth it. If these are the last years of my existence, if Victor's zealots kill me or the war consumes everything, I don't want to spend them denying this." Her thumb traced his cheekbone. "I love you, Darius Thorne. I have for years. I tried to logic it away, tried to convince myself it was just trauma bonding or convenient fiction. But it's not. It's real and complicated and probably doomed, and I love you anyway." He felt something break open in his chest, a knot of tension he'd been carrying for 30 months finally releasing. "I love you too." Never stopped, despite the distance and the silence and the very good reasons we had to stay apart. They kissed then, in a garden in Moscow while empires collapsed around them, 2 people choosing each other again despite every rational argument against it. When they parted, Seraphine was smiling, tired and sad but genuine. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we figure out how to fight this war together without destroying everything we touch. We coordinate better, share intelligence, maybe even run some joint operations if we can manage the security." He took her hand, his warm flesh against her cold. We stop pretending that being apart makes us more effective and accept that we're stronger together, even if it's messy. The summit, Seraphine said suddenly. There's a vote tomorrow on whether to continue the Concordat or formally declare it void. If it's declared void, all pretense of restraint ends. Total war, no rules. I know. The human delegation is split. The vampire delegation even more so. What if we did what we did last time? Broke ranks, voted contrary to our delegation's positions, showed that there's no consensus for total war. She gripped his hand tighter. Victor's faction wants the declaration of total war. They're pushing hard for it, lobbying the neutral houses. But if enough people break ranks, if we can show divided opinion, it won't stop the war, Darius cautioned. No. But it might stop the final escalation. Might keep some boundaries in place. Might buy time for the moderates to consolidate. Her intensity was building. We failed last time because we didn't have support, didn't have networks in place. But now we do. The Covenant, the Restoration, we have infrastructure. If we make this stand together, it means something. It was a risk. It was the same kind of principled stand that had cost them everything last time. But Darius found himself nodding anyway because some things were worth repeating even when they'd failed before. Together, he agreed. We do it together. The vote was scheduled for the summit's final session. The resolution was straightforward. Be it resolved that the Geneva Concordat has failed in its purpose and is hereby declared void, removing all restrictions on the conduct of hostilities between human and vampire forces. The human delegation was expected to vote no. They'd spent 70 years arguing for rules of war, couldn't abandon them now without looking hypocritical. The vampire delegation was expected to split, with Victor's Confederation voting yes and the moderate houses voting no, creating the kind of stalemate that would preserve the Concordat by default. What nobody expected was what actually happened. When the vote was called, the human delegation voted yes. All of them in a coordinated reversal that shocked the assembly. The official explanation was hastily provided. Recent escalations by vampire forces have demonstrated that the Concordat is being honored only in breach. Continuing to pretend otherwise serves no purpose. It was a calculated move by the hardliners, leveraging Victor's propaganda about the underground's supposed terrorism to argue that vampires couldn't be trusted with civilized warfare. The vampire delegation began voting. Victor's Confederation voted yes as expected, calling for formal acknowledgement that the war was total. But then something unexpected happened. The moderate houses, the Restoration Coalition, began voting yes as well. Seraphine sat frozen as house after house that she'd spent 30 months cultivating, that she'd thought were committed to restraint, voted to void the Concordat. When it came to her turn, she voted no, her voice clear and defiant. But she was alone. Every other moderate had folded under pressure, choosing political survival over principle. The resolution was passing. The Concordat was being declared void. And she'd failed to stop it. Then came the observer delegation's non-binding votes, technically meaningless, but recorded for the record. Darius stood. The Covenant votes no. We oppose the declaration that this war should proceed without restraint, without rules, without mercy. We recognize that voting no won't stop this resolution. But we vote no anyway because some things need to be said even when they're futile. He could see the human delegation glaring at him, could sense the political fallout already building. But he'd made his choice. The resolution passed. The Concordat was formally declared void. The moderates had lost completely and devastatingly. And then the real disaster began. The assassination attempt came during the closing reception. Security was supposed to be absolute, neutral ground, protected by the Eastern Coalition's best forces, with every possible precaution in place. But someone had gotten through anyway. The bomb went off in the main hall where delegates were mingling, a shaped charge designed to maximize casualties in the enclosed space. Darius, standing near the entrance, was thrown by the blast wave. He felt impact, pain, the sensory overload of an explosion at close range. When his hearing returned, the hall was chaos. Bodies on the ground, people screaming, security forces flooding in. And through the smoke and confusion, he saw Victor standing unharmed at the blast's epicenter, protected by some kind of energy shield. The vampire lord was smiling. It hadn't been an assassination attempt. It had been theater. Victor had arranged the bombing to make himself look like a victim, to create another propaganda opportunity. And Seraphine was running toward him, not away from the danger but toward Victor, her hand reaching for a weapon. No. Darius tried to move, but his body wasn't responding correctly. Something broken, system shock, he couldn't tell. Seraphine reached Victor and struck, fast and precise, aiming for the vital points that could actually threaten even an ancient vampire. But he'd been expecting her. He caught her wrist, twisted, and in one smooth motion, drove a blade up under her ribs, angled perfectly to pierce the heart. "Traitor," Victor said quietly, intimately, as he held her impaled on the blade. "Did you really think your little coalition could stop me? Did you think the moderates would hold when I controlled their house's finances, their territories, their blood supplies? You were always too idealistic, Seraphine. It made you predictable." He withdrew the blade and Seraphine collapsed. Vampire resilience could heal almost anything, but a pierced heart needed immediate treatment or the damage became irreversible. Darius was moving now, armor protocols irrelevant, pain irrelevant. He crossed the distance and dropped beside her, pressing his hands against the wound that was leaking black blood too fast. "Stay with me," he commanded. "Medics. I need vampire medical response now." Seraphine looked up at him, her crimson eyes beginning to fade. "Should have stayed apart," she managed. "Made you predictable too. Shut up. You're not dying. I won't let you. Not your choice." She reached up, her hand cold even for her, and touched his face. "Thank you for trying. For caring. For making these years worth something. Seraphine, please. The data chip. Your testimony. Release it. All of it. Victor, the hardliners, expose them. Promise me." "I promise, but you're going to help me do it because you're not dying?" "Promise." Her grip tightened with surprising strength. "No more acceptable losses. Make them all count." "I promise," he said, tears blurring his vision. "I promise." Her hand fell away. Her eyes closed. And Commander Darius Thorne sat in the ruins of a summit reception, holding the body of the woman he loved, while security forces tried to impose order on chaos. Around him, the world continued. Victor was already issuing statements about the tragedy, about the terrorism that had claimed his estranged wife's life, about the necessity of total war. The delegates were evacuating, returning to their capitals to prepare for the unrestricted conflict that had just been authorized. But Darius just sat there, holding Seraphine, feeling her body grow cold in a different way, not the supernatural chill of vampire flesh, but the absolute absence of life. She'd been wrong about one thing. He didn't have to choose between honoring her last request and trying to save her. She'd already made that choice for both of them. When the medics finally pulled him away, when they confirmed what he already knew, when they tried to get him to leave so they could process the scene, he refused. He stood there, covered in her blood, and addressed the cameras that were documenting everything. "Her name was Lady Seraphine Valcroix," he said, his voice ragged but clear. "She spent the last 4 years of her life fighting for peace, for restraint, for the idea that this war didn't have to consume everything. She died because she tried to stop the people who wanted total war, who profited from atrocity, who saw the Concordats end as an opportunity." He pulled the data chip from his pocket, the one she'd given him in the cathedral, now worn from years of carrying it. "This contains evidence. War crimes, corruption, the truth about who's been driving this conflict and why. I'm releasing all of it. Today. Let the world see what we've been fighting for and what killed her." Security moved to stop him, but he'd already transmitted the data to every media outlet, every diplomatic channel, every network he'd built over 4 years of resistance work. The chip's contents began spreading, viral and impossible to suppress. And Darius Thorne, former captain, former commander, former believer in redemption through principle, finally broke. They found him at the old cathedral in Geneva 3 days later. He'd returned there without conscious decision, drawn by some need to stand in the place where they'd made their covenant. The building was even more deteriorated now, another 4 years of weather and neglect taking their toll. But the bones of it remained, the Gothic arches still reaching toward a sky they could no longer fully see. He stood in the nave where they'd exchanged their treasures, where they'd promised to build something better. Around him, the world was burning. The data release had caused exactly the chaos he'd expected. Revelations about war crimes on both sides, evidence of Victor's propaganda manipulations, proof that the moderates had been systematically undermined. But chaos didn't equal change. If anything, it had hardened both sides, given them new grievances to weaponize. Colonel Reeves found him there, standing alone among the ruins. "They want to court-martial you," Reeves said without preamble. "Official charges include breach of security protocols, unauthorized release of classified intelligence, and about 6 other things that carry life sentences." "I don't care." "I know. That's why I'm here instead of a security team." Reeves moved to stand beside him. "The Covenant is splintering. Half the network wants to continue the work, honor what she was fighting for. The other half thinks you've compromised everything, that the data released destroyed what little diplomatic progress was possible. They're probably right. Maybe. Or maybe you forced a reckoning that was overdue. The intelligence in that data chip, it's devastating, Darius. Victor's faction is in chaos trying to explain it. 3 human generals have been arrested for war crimes. 2 vampire houses have formally broken with the Zealot Confederation." Reeves paused. "It won't end the war. But it's changed the conversation. She's still dead." "Yes. And that's not something you can tactical your way out of. That's just grief and you have to carry it." Reeves was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. The work you and Lady Valcroy started, the Covenant, the Restoration, it mattered. It still matters. People are alive because of you." "Are they? Or did I just delay their deaths while feeling good about myself?" Darius turned to face Reeves. "I've been thinking about that last argument. The one where she said I'd sacrifice the mission to save her. She was right, you know. Every time it came down to choice, I chose her over the work. And now she's dead anyway, and the work is in ruins, and I've got nothing to show for it except bodies I couldn't save. You've got 3,400 refugees who disagree. You've got a data release that's forcing accountability on both sides. You've got the example you set, showing that humans and vampires could work together, could love each other, could choose principle over tribalism." Reeves gripped his shoulder. "You lost, Darius. Lost badly, in ways that hurt worse than any physical wound. But you lost trying to do the right thing. That counts for something. Does it? It has to. Because if it doesn't, if trying to be better than our worst impulses doesn't count for anything, then what's the point of any of this?" Darius looked around the shattered cathedral, at the space where he'd made promises he couldn't keep, where he'd believed that love and principle could overcome centuries of hatred. "I'm done," he said quietly. I can't do this anymore. Can't lead the Covenant, can't coordinate operations, can't make decisions that cost other people everything. I'm empty, Marcus. She took it all with her when she died. All right. Then step back. Let others carry it for a while. But don't give up completely. Don't let Victor win by making you abandon everything you fought for. What would you have me do?" Reeves pulled something from his jacket, a familiar set of clothing. Simple, practical, the tactical gear of someone who worked in shadows. But not Darius's gear. Seraphine's. The outfit she'd worn the day she rescued him from detention, the day she'd proven that some promises were worth any cost to keep. She left instructions, Reeves said. In case something happened to her. Asked that these be given to you along with a message. Don't make any more dramatic rescues on my behalf. But if you must persist in being foolishly idealistic, wear this. Remember that you're not alone in the stubbornness. Darius took the clothing with shaking hands, feeling the texture of fabric she'd worn, seeing the careful repairs to blast damage, the worn spots where gear had rubbed during operations. It was her. A piece of her left behind. She knew, he said, voice breaking. She knew she was going to die and she left me this. She knew the risks. Faced them anyway. That's not defeat, Darius. That's courage. They held a memorial service. Not official. Both the Human Coalition and the Vampire Restoration were too politically compromised to acknowledge her publicly. But the underground networks, both human and vampire, gathered in neutral territory to remember what she'd fought for. Darius didn't speak. Couldn't speak. He stood at the back while others testified to her courage, her principle, her refusal to compromise. They spoke of missions she'd led, civilians she'd saved, the moderate coalition she'd built in the face of overwhelming pressure. But none of them spoke of what Darius remembered most, the small moments between operations. Her laugh when he said something unintentionally absurd. The way she'd learned to enjoy human food despite not needing it, treating meals as cultural experience rather than sustenance. The conversations in safe houses about philosophy and history, where her centuries of perspective made him see his own brief human life in new context. They spoke of war bride Seraphine Valcroix, strategic genius and diplomatic visionary. He mourned the woman who'd kissed him in a broken cathedral and said she loved him despite every rational argument against it. After the service, after the others had dispersed, he stood alone at the memorial marker, a simple stone with her name and the dates of her existence. 351 years reduced to numbers on rock. "I don't know what to do," he said to the marker, to her memory, to the empty air. "You said make them all count, but I don't know how. I'm just one person and I'm so tired, and I don't know if I can keep fighting when you're not here to remind me why it matters." The stone offered no answer. The dead didn't solve problems for the living. But as he stood there, he felt something shift. Not healing, it was too soon for that, maybe too soon ever. But recognition. She'd faced impossible odds, had fought knowing she'd likely lose, and had done it anyway because someone had to. She'd been stupidly idealistic just like him. And she'd asked him to continue that idealism, even after it cost her everything. He touched the stone one last time, then turned and walked away. Behind him, the memorial stood in a quiet garden that had survived the war through luck and determination. Ahead, the world waited, still burning, still dying, still desperately in need of people who refused to give up. Darius Thorne had one more mission to complete. Not for glory or redemption or tactical advantage. Just to honor a promise made to someone who'd believed he was better than his worst moments. He walked out of the garden wearing her gear, carrying her memory, and prepared himself to do what had to be done. The final confrontation came 6 months after Seraphine's death. Victor had consolidated power, absorbing the neutral houses, eliminating internal opposition, transforming the Vampire Confederation into something close to an empire. His forces pushed deeper into human territory, operating without the restraints the Concordat had imposed. The human coalition responded with escalating brutality, deploying weapons that poisoned blood supplies, that made territories uninhabitable for vampires, that edged closer to genocide with each iteration. The world was burning just as Seraphine had feared. And Darius Thorne had become something different. He still ran operations, rescues, evacuations, intelligence gathering. But there was an edge to him now, a hardness that hadn't been there before. The underground network whispered about the commander, about his tactical brilliance and utter ruthlessness in protecting civilians. He'd become what Victor had always accused him of being, an obstacle that had to be removed. The compound was Victor's personal stronghold, a fortress that combined ancient vampire architecture with modern defensive systems. Intelligence suggested Victor was planning a major offensive, something that would break the stalemate and give him decisive advantage. The data was kept in the stronghold's central vault, protected by security that was supposedly impenetrable. Darius planned to penetrate it anyway. "This is suicide," Colonel Reeves said flatly, looking at the mission brief. "You're talking about infiltrating the most heavily guarded location in vampire territory, stealing intelligence and escaping. It can't be done." "Probably not," Darius agreed. "But the alternative is letting Victor launch whatever he's planning and killing thousands, human and vampire both. Someone has to try." "Someone, yes. But why you? You're not expendable, Darius. The Covenant needs intelligence. I can get it." He met Reeves's eyes. "And if I don't come back, you'll have all the authority and resources you need to continue the work. I've already transferred everything." "You're really going to do this?" "I am. Because you think you owe it to her. Because you're carrying guilt that she died while you lived. Maybe. Or maybe because she was right. Individuals matter, and sometimes one person doing something impossible is what's required." Darius pulled on the tactical gear Seraphine had left him, the fabric altered now to fit his frame but still recognizably hers. "I'm not looking for redemption. I'm looking to stop what's coming, whatever the cost." The infiltration took 3 weeks of preparation. Darius assembled a team of 12, 6 human, 6 vampire, all members of the Covenant who'd proven their commitment. They studied Victor's compound, identified weaknesses, planned contingencies upon contingencies. The insertion went perfectly. Too perfectly. They reached the central vault without encountering significant resistance, found the intelligence exactly where it was supposed to be, and were preparing to extract when Victor himself appeared, blocking their exit. "Commander Thorne," Victor said, his voice carrying ancient amusement. "I've been expecting you. Well, not the exact timing, but I knew you'd come eventually. You're predictable that way." Darius felt the trap close around them. Everyone scatter. Multiple exit vectors. Move. The team dispersed, each taking a different route in the hopes that at least someone would escape with the intelligence. But Victor had planned for that too. His forces were waiting at every exit, driving the team back toward the central chamber, consolidating them into one location. It was Crimson Veil all over again. A trap built on understanding how the Covenant operated, how Darius thought, what he'd prioritize. Within minutes they were surrounded. The team had fought brilliantly, but they were outnumbered 10-1, and Victor's forces were elite. "Stand down," Darius ordered. "Weapons down. No one else dies tonight." His team looked at him in shock. Surrendering went against everything they'd trained for, but they obeyed. They dropped weapons and stood with hands raised, trusting that he had a plan. He didn't. He just couldn't watch more people die for his choices. Victor approached, circling Darius like a predator assessing prey. "You've caused me considerable trouble, Commander. The data release, the continued rescues, the persistent idealism that keeps giving people hope when they should be accepting reality. You're a problem that needs solving." "Then solve it," Darius said flatly. "Let my team go. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with the idea you represent, that humans and vampires can coexist as equals. That idea died with Seraphine, but you keep trying to resurrect it." Victor's smile was cold. "Did you know she came to me before the summit? Tried to negotiate one last time, offered to withdraw from public life if I'd just stop the escalation. I refused, of course. Told her the only way this ended was with one species dominant and the other extinct." Darius felt rage building, hot and human. "You killed her to make a point. I killed her because she was weak. Because she forgot what vampires are, apex predators, not negotiating partners." Victor stopped directly in front of him. "But you're different. You're not weak. You're stubborn and foolish and wastefully principled, but not weak. So I'm going to give you a choice." "I'm listening." "Join me. Not my ideology. I'm not delusional enough to think you'd accept vampire supremacy. But join me in ending this war quickly. Help me break the human coalition's command structure, and in return, I'll establish protocols for the human populations under vampire control. Limited autonomy, protection from casual predation, something closer to the Concordat than total subjugation. That's still slavery with extra steps. That's survival for billions who'll die if this war continues. You claim to care about individuals, Commander. Well, here's a choice that saves millions of individuals, human and vampire both. All it costs is your pride and your principles." Victor gestured at the captured team. "And their lives. Refuse me and I kill them all in front of you. Accept and they go free." It was the ultimate trap, designed specifically for someone like Darius who prioritized people over politics. Accept and betray everything he'd fought for, but save his team and potentially millions of civilians. Refuse and watch more people die for his principles. Darius looked at his team, humans and vampires who'd believed in the Covenant, who'd risked everything for the idea that coexistence was possible. He saw their faces, saw the understanding there. They knew what he was facing. Some were shaking their heads fractionally, "Don't do it, don't compromise," but others looked resigned, accepting whatever choice he made. He thought about Seraphine, about their last argument where she'd accused him of valuing individuals over the mission. About her death, proving that sometimes principles cost everything. He thought about the covenant they'd made in a broken cathedral, to build something better, to refuse to become monsters, to keep trying even when it seemed hopeless. He thought about 351 years of her existence, reduced to a memorial stone and a message, "Make them all count." "No," he said quietly. Victor's expression shifted to something like disappointment. "You'd let them die? After everything you've said about individuals mattering? I'd let us all die rather than help you build a world where slavery is dressed up as mercy." Darius met Victor's eyes steadily. "You want to kill them? Kill them. You want to kill me? Do it. But you won't get my cooperation. You won't get to claim that even the great idealist Commander Thorne eventually saw reason and accepted vampire dominance. Such a waste. Victor drew his blade, the same weapon that had killed Seraphine. Then I'll start with. Wait. One of Darius's team members stepped forward. Marcus Chin, a young human soldier who joined the Covenant after his entire unit was massacred. You said join you, help you. Does it have to be the commander? Or would any of us do? Victor's interest sharpened. Explain. I know the Human Coalition's command protocols. I was Intelligence Corps before I defected. Give me the same deal, protection for human populations, real protocols with teeth, and I'll give you what you need to decapitate their command structure. Marcus looked at Darius. Sir, you taught us that saving lives matters more than pride. Let me prove I learned that lesson. Marcus, no, Darius began. It's my choice, sir. Just like you taught us. Everyone gets to choose what they are. Marcus turned back to Victor. Well, do we have a deal? Victor studied him for a long moment, then smiled. We do. Your team goes free. You come with me. And if your intelligence is accurate, I'll establish the protocols as discussed. Marcus, don't do this. It's done, sir. Marcus's voice was steady. Get them out. Keep fighting. And remember, individuals matter. Even ones who make choices you don't agree with. Before Darius could respond, Victor's forces were moving, escorting the rest of the team toward an exit while keeping Marcus behind. Darius tried to resist, tried to reach Marcus, but hands pulled him back. His own people, understanding what was being given and not wanting to waste it. They emerged from the compound into pre-dawn darkness, minus one member, carrying intelligence they'd paid for with someone's freedom. The intelligence Marcus had traded himself for turned out to be real, and devastating. Victor's planned offensive would have killed millions. With the intelligence the team had stolen, combined with Marcus's sacrifice, Human Coalition forces were able to prepare defenses, to evacuate critical targets, to mitigate the catastrophe. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Darius felt like he was drowning. He stood in a briefing room 3 weeks later, listening to Coalition commanders praise the operation's success, discussing how Chen's brave sacrifice had saved countless lives, turning Marcus's terrible choice into a propaganda victory. And all Darius could think was, I should have stopped him. Should have found another way. Should have. Commander Thorne? Colonel Reeves touched his arm. They're asking you a question. Darius looked up to see the assembled commanders waiting. I'm sorry, what? We asked if you're prepared to continue operations. The intelligence suggests Victor's consolidating for another offensive in 6 months. We need the Covenant operating at full capacity. Darius felt the words stick in his throat. I need time. Time is what we don't have. Then find someone else. The words came out harder than intended. I'm done. The room went silent. General Hawthorne, older now, her face showing every one of the 75 years she'd lived through this war, spoke carefully. Commander, I understand you're grieving multiple losses. But the Covenant will continue. Colonel Reeves can lead it. He knows the networks, the protocols, the mission. Darius stood, feeling like he was moving through water. I've given you 4 years. I've given you everyone I cared about. I don't have anything left. What will you do? I don't know. But I can't keep making choices that cost other people everything while I survive. I can't carry any more names. He was already moving toward the door. You'll have my full cooperation on the transition. But after that, I'm out. He walked out of the briefing room, out of the command center, out of the life he'd built from exile and principle and desperate hope. He found himself at the border station where he was supposed to have been exiled 4 years ago. Border Station 17, a quiet posting where nothing ever happened, where soldiers served out their time in safety and boredom. It looked exactly as he'd imagined, functional, isolated, unremarkable. A place to fade into obscurity. The current commander, Captain Williams, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, greeted him without judgment. Heard you might be coming. We've got space if you need it. No questions asked. I'm not running from charges. I'm just done. I know. It's in your file. Special Envoy Thorne has fulfilled his obligations and is hereby granted indefinite leave for medical recovery. She smiled faintly. They're calling it medical, but we both know what it really is. Burnout. Moral injury. The accumulated weight of 4 years of impossible choices. There's a cabin about 2 miles from here, Williams continued. Previous occupant transferred out. It's basic but private. You can stay there as long as you need. No duties, no expectations. Just space to breathe. Why are you helping me? Because my unit was caught in a vampire raid 2 years ago. We would have been massacred, but the Covenant evacuated us through channels we didn't even know existed. 17 people lived because of what you built. She met his eyes. You earned the right to rest, Commander. Take it. The cabin was exactly what she'd described. Basic but private. One room, a bed, a table, a small kitchen. A window that looked out over empty plains that stretched to the horizon. Darius moved in with almost nothing. The tactical gear Seraphine had left him. A data chip containing 7 years of testimony. A memorial photograph from her service showing her surrounded by the people she'd saved. He spent the first week doing nothing. Just existing, sleeping when he was tired, eating when he was hungry, watching the plains and the sky with empty observation. The second week he started dreaming, vivid, terrible dreams where he replayed every choice, every moment where someone had died or been compromised or sacrificed for the mission. Seraphine's death on loop. Marcus walking away with Victor's forces. Sarah falling in the Crimson Veil compound. Hundreds of faces, all asking the same question. Was it worth it? He didn't have an answer. The third week he began walking. Long walks across the plains, miles each day, pushing his body until exhaustion quieted the questions. During one of these walks, he found himself at a small settlement. Barely a village, just a handful of families trying to survive in the margins. They recognized him immediately. Word had spread about Commander Thorne, about the Covenant, about what he tried to build. An elderly woman approached him. You're him, aren't you? The one who tried to stop the war. I tried. Failed. Maybe. But my granddaughter is alive because your people evacuated her from a raid zone. She's 6 years old, learning to read, laughing at silly things. The woman smiled. You call that failure? I call it incomplete success bought with other people's lives. All success costs something. Question is whether the cost means we stop trying or try harder next time. She gestured toward the settlement. We're having a meal tonight. Community dinner. You should come. Meet the people who lived because someone tried. He almost refused. But something in her expression, hope mixed with understanding, made him nod. The dinner was simple. Families gathered in a communal space, sharing food and stories, children playing while adults talked. They treated Darius like an honored guest but not a hero. Just someone who tried to help and was now hurt. A young woman approached him, maybe 20, with scars that suggested recent trauma. I was in one of the compounds you raided. The Redstone operation. I'm one of the 12 who got captured again afterward. She saw his expression shift to pain and raised a hand. I'm not here to blame you. I'm here to say thank you. For what? You were free then captured because of choices I made. You gave me 3 weeks of freedom. 3 weeks where I wasn't being used as a blood source, where I remembered what it meant to be human. Then I was captured, yes. But 6 months later, the Covenant evacuated the compound I was in. Rescued all of us, got us to safety. She smiled. You can't control everything, Commander. You can only keep trying. And the fact that you tried twice to save me means more than you know. Darius felt something crack in his chest, not breaking but shifting like ice beginning to thaw. He stayed at the dinner for hours listening to stories. Some were about direct rescues. Others were about how the Covenant's existence had given people hope, had proved that resistance was possible, had shown that not everyone had accepted the war as inevitable. They were alive because he'd tried. Not all of them. Not even most of them. But some. And maybe that had to be enough. The fourth week he started writing. Not testimony or intelligence reports but something else. Reflections on the past 4 years. Thoughts about Seraphine, about the choices they'd made, about what it meant to fight for principles that cost everything. He wrote about Crimson Veil, about standing beside her against enemies that should have destroyed them. About Geneva, about voting against his delegation and seeing her do the same. About the cathedral, about making promises neither of them could keep but making them anyway because hope required it. He wrote about the arguments, about her accusation that he'd valued her over the mission, about his counter that individuals had to matter. About discovering they were both right and both wrong, that there were no clean answers to impossible questions. He wrote about her death, about holding her while she bled out, about the last words she'd spoken, Make them all count. And he wrote about Marcus, about watching another person make the sacrifice Darius had refused to make, about living with the guilt of being saved by someone else's terrible choice. The writing helped. Not healing, it was too soon for that, but acknowledgement. Accepting that grief and guilt would be part of him now, scars that would never fully fade but could be carried. On the 5th week, Colonel Reeves came to visit. "You look terrible," Reeves said by way of greeting. "Thanks. You came all this way to tell me that." "I came to update you. Victor's offensive was stopped. His forces took heavy casualties, and 3 more houses have abandoned his confederation. The restoration, what's left of it, is consolidating. They're calling themselves the New Covenant now, in honor of what you and Lady Valcroy tried to build." Darius felt something stir at that. "The work continues." "It does. And they want you back. Not as commander, they understand you need distance. But as advisor, consultant, someone who can provide guidance without bearing operational responsibility." "I don't know if I can." "That's fine. They're not asking for an answer today. They're just asking you to think about it." Reeves paused. "There's something else." Marcus' chin escaped. Darius's head snapped up. "What?" 2 weeks ago. Victor had been using him as intelligence source, keeping him close. Marcus fed him enough real information to stay valuable while passing false intelligence through other channels. Then he found an opportunity and ran. "He's with the New Covenant now, debriefing." "He was a double agent?" "He was someone who made an impossible choice and then did his best to survive it while undermining the enemy from within." Reeves smiled. "Just like someone else I know. He's asking to see you if you're willing." Marcus came to the cabin 3 days later. He looked older, harder, marked by 6 weeks as Victor's captive. But alive. They sat across from each other in silence for a long moment. "You shouldn't have done it," Darius said finally. "I know. But I did. And I'm not sorry." Marcus met his eyes. "You taught us that individuals matter, that we all get to choose." "I chose. You don't get to carry guilt for my choice. You were under my command. I was a member of the Covenant. That means I had agency, responsibility, the right to make my own decisions. Taking that away from me by claiming guilt is actually pretty insulting, sir." Despite everything, Darius found himself almost smiling. "When did you get so wise?" "About week 3 of being Victor's prisoner. Turns out captivity gives you time to think." Marcus leaned forward. "The New Covenant needs you, Commander. Not leading operations, they've got people for that. But providing the moral center, the reminder of why we're doing this. You and Lady Valcroy, you showed us what was possible. We need that vision to continue." "I'm broken, Marcus. I don't have vision left." "Then let us carry it for a while. Let us be the stubborn idealists while you recover. But don't abandon us completely. Don't let Victor win by making you give up." It was almost exactly what Seraphine had said in her note. Different words, same meaning. Darius returned to the Covenant 6 months after Seraphine's death. Not as commander but as something else. The conscience, the reminder, the voice that asked why, when operations got too tactical and forgot the human cost. He wore her gear when he worked. A visible reminder of what had been lost, what they were still fighting for. The war continued. Victor's confederation weakened but didn't break. The human coalition remained divided between hardliners and pragmatists. Civilians continued to die, territories continued to burn, the machinery of mutual destruction ground onward. But in the margins, the New Covenant worked. Smaller now, more careful but persistent. Evacuating refugees. Documenting atrocities. Maintaining back channels between moderates. Proving that even in total war, even after the Concordat's failure, some people refused to accept that genocide was inevitable. Darius led by example rather than command. When operations succeeded, he reminded everyone of the individuals saved. When they failed, he helped people carry the grief without letting it destroy them. And sometimes, late at night in whatever safe house they were occupying, he would pull out the photograph of Seraphine and have quiet conversations with her memory. "We're still trying," he'd say. "Still being stupidly idealistic. Still refusing to accept that the only options are domination or extinction. I don't know if it's making a difference. But I'm keeping my promise. Making them all count." The photograph offered no answer. The dead couldn't solve problems for the living. But he kept trying anyway. The final mission came 18 months after Seraphine's death. Intelligence indicated that Victor was preparing to deploy a weapon, something biological designed to target human blood specifically, that would spread like plague through human populations while leaving vampires untouched. It was the ultimate escalation, the tool that would end the war through simple extermination. The weapon was being kept in Victor's personal vault, the same compound where Darius's team had been captured before. The same place where Marcus had made his choice. The new covenant convened an emergency council. 20 representatives, human and vampire, military and civilian, the collected leadership of what remained of the resistance movement. "We need to destroy it," said Commander Sarah Park, who'd taken over tactical operations. "Infiltration team shaped charges, blow the vault and everything in it." "That's a suicide mission," someone countered. "After the last infiltration, Victor tripled security. We'd lose everyone we sent." "So we send no one," Darius said quietly. All eyes turned to him. "We negotiate." The room erupted in protest, but Darius raised a hand. "Victor wants legitimacy. He wants to rule, not preside over ashes. A weapon that kills all humans doesn't give him an empire, it gives him an empty planet with nothing to rule over. That's a weakness we can exploit." "You think he'll just destroy the weapon because we ask nicely?" "No. I think he'll destroy it in exchange for something he wants more." "Which is?" "Me." The room went completely silent. Colonel Reeves found his voice first. "Absolutely not. You're not trading yourself." "Why not? You said it yourself, I'm the symbol. The human who loved a vampire, who built bridges, who proved coexistence was possible. Victor spent 2 years trying to discredit that. What better proof of his ideology's superiority than me, the great idealist, surrendering and accepting vampire rule?" "He'll kill you," Marcus said flatly. "Maybe. Or maybe he'll keep me as a trophy, proof that even the most principled humans eventually break. Either way, the weapon gets destroyed and millions of humans live." Darius looked around the table. "Isn't that what we've been fighting for? Protecting individuals even when the cost is personal?" "Don't use our principles against us," Sarah snapped. "You taught us that individual lives matter, that includes yours." "It does. And I'm choosing to spend mine buying everyone else more time." He stood, decision made. "I'll offer Victor a trade. The weapon for my public surrender. He gets his propaganda victory, we get the threat eliminated. And if he refuses? Then we go with your plan, infiltration and destruction. But we try the negotiation first. Give me 48 hours. If I fail, proceed with contingencies." The council voted. It was close, but Darius's plan won by 3 votes. The meeting was arranged through back channels, neutral intermediaries, diplomatic protocols that still technically existed even though the Concordat didn't. Victor agreed immediately, which should have been warning enough. They met in the ruins of the old Geneva complex where the first summit had been held. Symbolism wasn't subtle, but it was effective. Darius came alone as agreed. Victor brought a full honor guard as expected. "Commander Thorne," Victor said, spreading his arms in mock welcome. "Or should I say, Advisor Thorne now? I hear you've stepped down from leadership. Couldn't handle the pressure of all those deaths you caused." "I came to discuss terms," Darius said evenly. "You have a weapon. I want it destroyed. In exchange, I'll give you what you've wanted since the beginning. My public surrender, acknowledgement that coexistence failed, a symbolic victory that proves your ideology." Victor studied him, eyes gleaming with predatory interest. "You do that? Stand before cameras and tell the world that Lady Valcroy died for nothing? That your covenant was naive fantasy? That vampire dominance is inevitable? If it means the weapon is destroyed and millions of humans live, yes. Fascinating. You really do mean it." Victor circled him slowly. "But here's the problem, Commander. I don't want your surrender. I want your destruction. I want to break you so completely that your name becomes a cautionary tale. Surrender is too clean, too noble. It lets you maintain dignity. Then what do you want? I want you to watch." Victor's smile was terrible. "The weapon will be deployed in 48 hours. It will spread through human populations, killing billions while leaving vampires untouched. And you'll watch it happen, helpless, knowing you failed to stop it. That's the ending I want for you, complete, undeniable failure." Darius felt ice in his chest. You won't get away with this. The moderate houses have been neutralized, bought off or intimidated into silence. The human coalition is too divided to respond effectively. And your new covenant? Victor laughed. 18 people in this entire war-torn world who still believe in your fantasy. They're irrelevant. Then why meet with me at all? Because I wanted to see your face when you realized you'd lost. When you understood that your principles, your sacrifices, your desperate idealism, all of it was for nothing. I wanted that moment. Victor leaned close. She died for nothing, Darius. Marcus's sacrifice meant nothing. Every person you saved will die in the plague anyway. You failed. Completely. Finally. And you'll live with that knowledge for the rest of your very short life. Darius stood frozen, feeling the full weight of defeat. Victor was right. He'd lost. The weapon would deploy, billions would die, and everything he'd fought for would be ash. Then Victor made a mistake. I'm keeping her blade, by the way, he said casually. The ceremonial knife she gave you that you gave back. It's on display in my study. A trophy from the vampire who forgot her place. And something in Darius broke. Not despair. Rage. All the grief he'd been carrying, all the guilt, all the accumulated pain of 4 years of impossible choices, it transformed into pure incandescent fury. No, he said quietly. No. No. You don't get to keep her blade. You don't get to display her memory like a hunting trophy. You don't get to win. Darius's voice was steady, calm, absolutely certain. You made a mistake, Victor. You told me where the weapon is, in your personal compound, deploying in 48 hours. You told me your security is impenetrable. You told me I've already lost. Because you have. Maybe. But I'm going to try anyway. I'm going to go to your compound, I'm going to destroy that weapon, and I'm going to take back her blade. And if you kill me doing it, then at least I died trying rather than living with surrender. Victor's amusement faded. You're declaring a traditional challenge? You, a human, against me? No. I'm declaring something older than your traditions. I'm declaring that some things matter more than survival. That principles are worth dying for. That you don't get to use fear of death to control people who've already accepted they might not survive. Darius stepped closer. I'm declaring that you've already lost, Victor. Because you need people to submit, to acknowledge your superiority, to accept vampire dominance. And I never will. You can kill me, but you can't make me accept that you were right. For just a moment, Darius saw something flicker across Victor's expression. Not fear, but recognition. Recognition that Darius meant every word, that there was no threat or torture that would change his position. Then Victor's smile returned, colder than before. Then die trying, human. My forces will kill you before you reach the compound's outer wall. And when you're dead, I'll display your armor next to her blade. Matching trophies to failed idealism. We'll see. Darius turned and walked away, his back to Victor and the honor guard, making himself vulnerable in a gesture that was either supreme confidence or supreme foolishness. No one stopped him. He returned to the new Covenant's headquarters and laid out the situation. No sugarcoating, no false hope. Just the brutal reality. 48 hours until deployment, impossible security, and near certain death for anyone who tried. So we're doing it anyway, right? Marcus asked. Darius looked around the table at the assembled council. I am. I won't ask anyone else to join me. This isn't a mission, it's a statement. A refusal to accept that Victor wins. But it's almost certainly suicide. Then it's a good thing we specialize in impossible missions, Sarah said. Full team. Everyone who can fight. We hit them with everything. The tactical analysis says we'll fail. I know. But that's never stopped us before. She stood. You taught us that individuals matter, that principles are worth the cost. Time to prove we learned the lesson. We're coming with you. One by one, the council members stood. Human and vampire, military and civilian, all of them choosing to face impossible odds because the alternative was accepting defeat. This is insane, Darius said, but his voice carried hope instead of despair. Stupidly idealistic, Marcus agreed, using Seraphine's phrase. Just the way she'd want it. The assault on Victor's compound began at dawn. They came from 6 directions simultaneously, using every tactic they'd learned, every advantage they could manufacture. The new Covenant fielded 50 operatives, Everyone they had, burning all their resources on this single desperate strike. They were outnumbered 20-1. They were outgunned. They were attacking a fortress that had never been breached. They attacked anyway. Darius led the central assault, wearing Seraphine's gear like armor, carrying her memory like a shield. The fighting was brutal, close quarters, the kind of combat where technology mattered less than determination. They fought through the outer defenses. Lost people. Marcus went down with a leg wound, Sarah took a strike that broke her arm, others fell protecting their teammates. But they kept moving forward, kept pressing, kept refusing to accept that they'd already lost. They reached the central vault. Darius placed the charges personally, setting them to destroy the weapon and the research that created it. Victor appeared then as expected, blocking the exit with his elite guard. "You made it further than I thought," Victor admitted. "But it ends here. You're trapped, your people are dying, and in 5 minutes my reinforcements arrive. Surrender now and I'll make it quick." Darius looked at the timer, charges set, 4 minutes to detonation. Looked at his remaining team, 12 people, wounded and exhausted but still standing. Looked at Victor, who represented everything they'd been fighting against. "No," Darius said. "We don't surrender. We never have. We never will." He began removing his gear. The tactical vest first, setting it aside carefully. Then the armor plates that had kept him alive through dozens of operations. The communication equipment. The weapons harness. Piece by piece he stripped away the protection, the tools, the symbols of military capability. "What are you doing?" Victor asked, confused. "Proving a point." Darius continued removing gear until he stood in just basic clothing. Human, vulnerable, stripped of anything that enhanced or protected. "You wanted to break me. Wanted to prove that humans need vampire dominance to survive. But here's the truth, Victor. I don't need armor. I don't need weapons. I don't need any of your permission or protection to be worth something." He stood straight, unarmed and unarmored, facing an ancient vampire and his elite guard. Behind him, his team watched in stunned silence. Around them, the compound was collapsing as the charges counted down. "I'm just a human," Darius continued. "Mortal, limited, weak by your standards. But I loved someone you killed. I built something you tried to destroy. I kept fighting when you said I'd lost. And right now, in this moment, I'm more free than you'll ever be. Because I don't need to dominate anyone to matter. I just need to choose what I believe in and refuse to compromise." He turned his back on Victor, the ultimate gesture of dismissal, and faced his team. "Anyone who can move, get out. The charges blow in 3 minutes. That's enough time if you run now." "What about you?" Sarah asked. "I'm making sure they detonate. Someone needs to guard the vault, keep Victor's people from disarming them. That someone is me." Darius, "No. It's my choice," he said, echoing Marcus's words from months ago. "You don't get to carry guilt for it. Now go. That's an order from your advisor." His team looked at each other, a lifetime of communication passing in glances. Then they moved, helping wounded teammates, fighting toward the exit, leaving Darius alone in the vault's entrance facing Victor. When the last of his people were clear, Darius smiled. 2 minutes. You should probably leave too. I know vampires are resilient, but this much explosive is going to hurt." Victor stared at him, and for the first time in their conflict, he looked uncertain. "You're really going to die for this? For people who won't even remember your name in a generation?" "I'm going to die for the principle that some things matter more than survival." "And Victor? People will remember. Maybe not my name, but the idea. That someone stood up and said no to you. That resistance was possible. That love and principle weren't weaknesses." Darius's voice was calm, certain. "You're going to live for centuries, and you'll spend all of them knowing that you couldn't break one stubborn human who refused to accept your superiority. I could kill you right now. You could. But you won't. Because if you kill me, you prove me right, that you need violence to control people, that your superiority is a lie maintained by force. And if you leave me to die in the explosion, well, I still win. The weapon is destroyed. Your compound is collapsing. And I die on my own terms, not yours." Victor stood frozen, and Darius could see the conflict. Centuries of supremacy warring with the sudden realization that victory didn't feel the way he'd expected. 30 seconds, Darius said. "Leave or stay, but decide now." Victor turned and fled, his elite guard following, abandoning the compound as it began to shake from preliminary detonations. Darius stood alone in the vault entrance, counting down the final seconds. He thought about Seraphine, about the covenant they'd made in a broken cathedral. About Marcus and Sarah and everyone who'd chosen to stand with him despite the cost. About 4 years of fighting impossible battles and losing more often than winning but refusing to give up. He thought about the billions of humans who'd never know how close they'd come to extinction, who'd live because someone had been stubborn enough to say no to genocide. "I kept my promise," he said to Seraphine's memory. "Made them all count. I hope that's enough." The charges detonated. The explosion that destroyed Victor's compound was visible from 30 miles away. The weapon was obliterated, along with all research and materials needed to recreate it. Victor survived. Ancient vampires were resilient, but his power was broken. 3/4 of his confederation abandoned him in the aftermath, and the moderate houses began consolidating control. The war didn't end that day. Wars never end that cleanly. But something changed. The narrative shifted. The image of Commander Darius Thorne removing his armor and standing unarmed against an ancient vampire became symbol and story, spreading through both human and vampire populations. He became legend, the human who loved a vampire, who built bridges when everyone else was burning them, who chose principle over survival and inspired others to do the same. Whether he actually died in that explosion, no one could confirm. No body was recovered. Some claimed they saw him walking away in the chaos. Others insisted he couldn't have survived. The truth became less important than what he represented. The new covenant continued, led by Sarah Park and Marcus Chen. They invoked his name in Seraphine's memory, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, their work began to matter. Back channels reopened. Moderate factions on both sides found ways to coordinate. The war continued, but the brutality decreased, constraints reappeared, the death toll began to slow. 20 years later, a new concordat was signed. Not in Geneva, that city was rubble, but in a neutral zone that had been maintained by the underground networks. Human and vampire delegates sat at the same table and negotiated terms that recognized both people's sovereignty without requiring either's subjugation. At the signing ceremony, representatives from the new covenant placed 2 memorial markers in the hall. One for Lady Seraphine Valcroix, who'd given her life trying to prevent total war. One for Commander Darius Thorne, who'd refused to accept that genocide was inevitable. And sometimes in the years that followed, travelers to neutral zones would report seeing a figure in the distance. A man in worn tactical gear, working quietly to evacuate refugees, to maintain safe houses, to help those caught in the remaining conflicts. He never gave his name. He never sought recognition. He just did the work, helped who he could, and disappeared before anyone could ask questions. It was probably just rumor. The hopeful imagination of people who needed to believe that the legend had survived, that somewhere out there, someone was still fighting for them. But maybe not. Maybe, sometimes, principles were stronger than death. Maybe, sometimes, refusing to surrender meant more than any victory. Maybe, sometimes, one person removing their armor and standing vulnerable against overwhelming force could change everything.